Colorado Territory. Spring of 1878, the wind came down off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains sharp with snow, and by the time she stumbled through the barbed gate and into the yard, her boots were soaked, her fingers raw, and she could hardly see straight from hunger. "Easy there," said a low voice from somewhere ahead. She froze, her breath catching. A tall man stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, but the barrel was pointed down. He wore a worn trail coat, dark hair falling across his brow, and his eyes, a deep gray, squinted at her through the dusk. I thought this was the McLeary place," she said, voice hoarse. "I was told it was north of the creek." The man's mouth pressed into a line. "You passed the creek 2 miles back. McLeary's are east. You came the wrong way." Her knees buckled, but she caught herself on the fence post. He glanced down at her boots, then back up. "Name's Quentin Lorne. You look half dead. Come on in. You can warm up and get your bearings after supper." She hesitated. "I do not make a habit of shooting lost women," he added dryly, turning back toward the house. She followed. Inside, the cabin smelled of stew and wood smoke. The place was clean, spare a pine table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with a kettle hanging over the flames. A leather-bound Bible lay open on the shelf. She lingered near the door, fingers fumbling with her shawl. "I will not ask your story tonight," Quentin said, setting a tin plate on the table. "But you will eat. Sit." She did. He ladled thick venison stew into her bowl. Her hands shook as she brought the spoon to her mouth. By the 3rd bite, she blinked fast, swallowing hard. "You all right?" he asked. Yes." She looked up. "Thank you." He sat across from her, eating in silence for a while, then his voice quiet. "You have a name, Selena Sutton," she said. "From Wichita originally, but that was years ago. You were alone out there." She nodded. He studied her a moment, then turned back to his plate. When the meal was done, she helped gather the dishes without being asked. He did not protest. He handed her a folded quilt. "You can take the bed. I will sleep by the fire." "I cannot." "You can," he said. "No one stays out in that cold." "Not if I can stop it." Selena stood there, the quilt in her arms, watching him kneel to stoke the fire. Something in her chest shifted. She had not known kindness like that in a long time. "Good night, Miss Sutton," he said. "Good night, Mr. Lorne." By morning, the snow had melted into a low mist that clung to the grass. Selena woke to the sound of wood being split outside. When she stepped out, she found Quentin at the chopping block, sleeves rolled, face serious. "I can help," she said. He paused, then handed her a smaller hatchet. "You ever split kindling?" "No, but I learned fast." He nodded once. They worked in rhythm. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. After a while, she asked, "You live here alone?" "My father passed 4 years ago. This was his land. I stayed after." "No family left?" "No one close." She swallowed. "No one." The truth was harder than that, but she was not ready. By the 3rd day, she knew the layout of his home, the pattern of the land, and the way Quentin moved, deliberate, quiet, with a steadiness that made her feel like the ground was finally still beneath her feet. "I will ride to town tomorrow for supplies," he said over breakfast. "You should come. You can ask after the McLearys." She stared down at her plate, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I should." But her chest ached at the idea. The general store in Westcliff was busy with ranch hands and wives. Selena stayed close to Quentin's side, her shawl pulled tight. He bought flour, sugar, and a new set of boots for her without asking. "You did not have to do that," she said once they were outside. He shrugged, adjusting the sack on his shoulder. "I do not make a habit of letting good women wear holes through their souls." She smiled then, and he glanced over, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. They rode back in silence. But that night, over cornbread and beans, he asked, "What happened, Selena?" She stared into the fire. "My husband died last year. Consumption. We had no children. The debt swallowed everything after. I tried to make it on my own, but her voice cracked. I walked too far too long. I was trying to find my cousin. She married into the McLearys. I thought maybe she could help. Quentin nodded once. You do not owe me anything, but you are not alone anymore. Tears welled in her eyes. You do not even know me. I know enough. 3 weeks passed. She never found the strength to leave. Quentin never asked her to go. They fell into a rhythm, tending the hens, cooking meals, mending the roof. He taught her to ride better, to shoot straight. She taught him how to make molasses bread without burning the edges. One night, after she dropped a pail of water and laughed until she cried, he stepped close. You sound like the sun breaking through clouds when you laugh. She looked up at him, startled. I mean it, he said, voice low, her breath caught. You should not say things like that. Why not? Because I will believe you. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Then believe me. By mid-April the land had thawed. The trees budded. She stood with him on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise over the valley. I never thought I would have a peaceful morning again, she whispered. He glanced sideways. You could have 100 more. If you stay, she turned to him. Are you asking me to? I am saying I want to build something with someone who makes this place feel alive again, and I think that someone is you. Selena stared at him, her chest full. I want that too, she said. He took her hand. And that was how it began. She had wandered into the wrong homestead, but found the right man. A cowboy who shared his table with a stranger, and found the woman who would become his bride. The wind shifted warmer as May settled in. The snowmelt fed the gullies, and wild iris bloomed along the fence line. Selena stood in the small garden behind the cabin, sleeves rolled to the elbow, coaxing rows of onions into place with her fingertips. Quentin had turned up the soil 2 days prior and built a fence to keep out the deer. She hadn't asked him to, he just said, "Figured you'd want your own corner of the land," and handed her a worn trowel. He was mending the axle under the wagon when she came around from the garden, brushing dirt from her palms. You always fix things that quiet? She asked, leaning against the fence he'd built. He slid out from beneath the wagon, the dirt streaked across his shirt. Noise doesn't help the work. I wouldn't know. She smiled faintly. I never lived anywhere long enough to mend what broke. He stood and wiped his hands on a cloth. Well, you're here now, and this place doesn't mend itself. Selena stepped closer, the smell of sun-warmed pine thick in the air. I've been wondering something, she said. Quentin raised an eyebrow. You never asked why I didn't go to the McLearys after all. He studied her a moment. Did you want me to? No, she said, but I thought you might. You didn't pack your things. You planted onions. He folded the cloth and set it on the wagon bed. That told me what I needed to know. She looked at him, the way his jaw set when he was thinking, the way he didn't press when silence needed to stretch. You always read people like that, only when I care how they turn out. The words hung there, not rushed, not heavy, just true. Later that evening, after the chickens were penned and the sun had dropped behind the ridge, Quentin came in carrying a cedar box. Found this in the loft, he said. Was my mother's. Thought maybe you'd make better use of it than an attic mouse. Selena opened the lid. Inside were buttons, bits of ribbon, a fine needle case, and a folded length of lace. Her breath caught. This is beautiful. She liked making things with her hands, didn't talk much, but you could read her heart in what she made. His voice was quieter now. She died when I was 14. My father never let me throw it out. Selena ran her fingers over the lace. I'll take good care of it. I know you will. They didn't speak much after that. She sat near the hearth, sorting ribbons by color, and he read a dog-eared almanac by lamplight. The quiet stretched again, but it didn't feel empty. The next morning, Quentin saddled both horses. We'll check fence lines on the east slope, he said. Be good for you to see the rest of the land." Selena adjusted the hem of her skirt and mounted without help. She was still getting used to the saddle, but she didn't complain. He noticed the way she kept her back straight even when the path grew steep. They rode through aspen groves and over rock-slick ridges, past a stream where trout darted in the shallows. "This all part of your father's claim?" she asked as they watered the horses. "He staked it before the war, paid it off after, worked it alone till I was old enough to help." Quentin paused, watching the water. "I buried him beneath that cottonwood you see yonder." He loved this place. She followed his gaze to a knoll shaded by a single tall tree. "I'd like to see it," she said. He didn't answer right away, but turned his horse uphill. She followed. The grave was marked with a carved stone, simple and strong. She stood beside him, hands folded. "I think he'd have liked you," Quentin said. Selena turned toward him. "You think so? You don't flinch from hard things." He respected that. Later, over lunch in the grass, Quentin passed her a leather pouch of dried apples. "I've been thinking about the cabin. It's got 2 rooms, but one's full of scrap and old tools. I could clear it out." Selena looked over at him, the sun catching in his hair. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's time I made room for someone else to belong here." He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't have to. She leaned in, just enough that their shoulders touched. "I'd like that." The ride home was quiet again, but filled with something new. Not just comfort this time, but promise. That night he fixed the door where it had been sticking since the last storm. She watched him from the table, folding the lace into a drawer he'd cleared for her things. "You always fix what needs fixing," she said. Quentin set down the hammer. "I try." She crossed the room and stood before him. "Then let's fix the rest together." He rested his forehead against hers, hands gentle at her waist. "That's all I want." And in the hush between them, the world outside went still. The wind didn't rattle the shutters. The fire didn't crackle. There was no need. What they had begun was quiet, steady, and sure. And it would hold. The wedding was small, quiet, a day marked more by the soft hush of wind through the cottonwoods than any number of guests or fine lace. Quentin shaved and wore a clean shirt. Selena stitched herself a simple dress from unbleached muslin and tied her hair with a strip of blue ribbon she'd found in the cedar box. They stood beneath the wide sky in the meadow just west of the cabin, where the grass grew long and gold between the stones. Reverend Bales from Westcliff rode out at Quentin's request and performed the vows with a steady voice. He brought his wife, who clasped Selena's hands afterward and pressed a wrapped loaf into her arms. "For your first morning," she said. "There's nothing like warm bread and a man who knows how to build a fire." Selena laughed, a warm, breathless sound, and Quentin, standing close behind her, ran his thumb along the edge of her palm. Once the wagon carrying the Bales couple rolled back down the trail, the land returned to stillness. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a bull elk let out a long, low call that echoed through the valley. Quentin turned to her, unsure. "You all right?" "Better than I ever thought I'd be," she said, her fingers laced with his. That night they didn't speak much. He banked the fire low while she folded their shared quilt at the foot of the bed. When they finally lay beside each other, backs warm against the wool mattress, she reached across the space between them and found his hand waiting for hers. "I want to learn it all," she whispered. "How to care for the land, how to keep chickens alive through a winter, how to brand calves and smoke meat and patch a roof good enough to hold." "We've got time," he said, voice low in the darkness. "And you've got me." She slept with her cheek to his shoulder, the ache in her chest finally quiet. By early June, the land had hardened beneath their boots. They spent the mornings checking the pasture fence and watching for signs of stray cattle. Quentin showed her how to read hoof prints left in soft earth, how to tell when a post had been nudged loose by something heavier than wind. She listened, eyes sharp, mouth set in concentration. One morning, while they saddled the horses, Quentin glanced at her hands. "You've been working through blisters without saying a word. I didn't want to slow you down." He steadied the cinch on her saddle. "You'd have to try awful hard to do that." Her grin was crooked, her fingers stained with linseed oil from the barn door she'd helped repair the day before. "Then I'll try harder." That evening, she brought out a tin box she'd kept tucked beneath the bed. Inside were scraps of dried plant matter, sewn into folded cloth packets. "I used to keep a garden with herbs," she said. "I'd dry what I could and store them for teas and poultices. I want to try again. You think the ground here'll take to it. It's not just the ground that needs tending," she said. "Some things stay quiet inside a person too long. I like the feel of it growing something that starts out small." He nodded, watching her hands work. "You tell me what you need. I'll build you something to keep the rabbits out." By midsummer, the garden was coming into itself. Scarlet runner beans climbed the posts Quentin had set, and the rosemary smelled sharp when she brushed past it. He'd built her a bench from scrap pine and set it under the old juniper near the edge of the house. She sat there in the evenings, shelling peas into a bowl while watching the light stretch across the ridge. One night, as the sun dropped low and painted the wood grain of the porch in long amber streaks, she turned to him. "I want to make a place for others, one day. Folks who have lost more than they should have. I've got it in me, I think." "You've got steadiness in you," he said. "That's rarer than most things." She reached over and took his hand, her thumb tracing the scar near his knuckle. "You gave me the kind of quiet I didn't know I needed. You gave me a place to stop running." He looked at her the way he always did, like she was something he'd expected to find once, long ago, and had finally remembered how to reach. "You gave me something back to," he said. "I just didn't know I was missing it." That night, the rain came soft and steady, tapping against the roof in rhythm. They lay side by side, listening to it. No words passed between them, just the sound of breath and the warmth of skin against skin. By first frost, the chickens had grown fat, the root cellar was full, and the shutters Quentin had built no longer creaked when the wind came down from the ridge. The garden had gone to seed, but the rosemary still clung to its scent. On the last mild afternoon before the cold truly set in, she wrapped a scarf around her neck and walked the ridge with him, watching their land stretch quiet and golden below. "You ever think about how different it could have gone?" she asked. He reached for her hand. "I think about how lucky I was that you came through the wrong gate," she smiled. "It was the right one in the end." They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, as the sun dipped behind the Sangre de Cristos, casting the sky in rose and gold. The wind tugged at her scarf. He pressed a kiss to her temple, soft and certain. They didn't speak of the past anymore. There was no need. The cabin held their laughter now, and the land bore the mark of two hands working side by side. Whatever had come before, whatever roads they'd wandered, this was the one they'd chosen together. And it would hold. The first true snow came in early November, falling soft and steady over the ridge until the world hushed beneath it. Quentin had spent the 2 days prior hauling firewood into the lean-to, and Selena had packed dried beans and cornmeal into cloth sacks, storing them high on the shelf above the hearth. When the snow finally settled thick against the windowsills, they stayed inside, the cabin holding close around them, warm with lamp light and the scent of cinnamon bark steeping on the stove. Selena took to mending the saddle straps that had cracked from summer heat, her needle moving with quiet purpose. Quentin sat nearby, polishing the rifle she'd once seen leaning just inside the door that first night she arrived. Neither spoke for a while, the quiet between them companionable. "You ever think about leaving Colorado?" she asked, knotting the thread. He looked up, thoughtful. "Once, right after my father passed. Thought maybe I'd try Kansas or Montana, but I never did." "Why not?" "Didn't know what I was looking for," he said. "Turns out it was here all along. Just took you showing up for me to see it." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes had gone distant, watching the snow stack up against the glass. Then, quietly, "If I'd found my cousin's place instead, I'd have missed all this." He set the rifle down, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I don't think you would have stayed there long. You weren't looking for someone to fix things for you. You were looking for a place you could build something with your own hands." Selena reached across the table, touching his wrist. "You ever wonder why you opened the gate that day?" "I'd seen the smoke from the trail, figured something wasn't right, but I think maybe I was just ready for you." That night, she brought out a small box of pressed flowers she'd hidden beneath the bed. "I picked these the first week I was here," she said. "Didn't know why at the time. Just needed something to hold on to, I guess." He turned the box in his hands, studying the tiny, dried petals. "You want to keep them in the Bible?" he asked. She nodded. "Between the pages of Ruth." "That's where my mother kept hers." He found the chapter, tucked the flowers in gently, and set the book back on the shelf without a word. The following morning, the snow had stopped. The air outside was sharp and blue, and the trees bent heavy with white. Quentin hitched the sled and harnessed the mule, loading a crate of smoked meat and dried apples for the widow 2 miles south who hadn't been seen since the last frost. Selena wrapped herself in her thickest coat and climbed up beside him without hesitation. The trail was nearly lost beneath the snow, but he guided them steady, the sled creaking low through the drifts. Selena watched the land roll out before them, quiet and unbroken. "You think she's all right?" she asked after a while. "If she's not, we'll stay. Help her through," he said. They found the widow tending a fire in her stove with a broken kindling box and one arm wrapped tight in a sling. She tried to wave them off, but Quentin stepped inside and set her stove right while Selena boiled tea and salted the meat for keeping. When they returned that evening, the wind had picked up again. Quentin helped her down from the sled, his hands firm at her waist. "You didn't have to come," he said, "but I'm glad you did." "I didn't come for charity," she said. "I came because you'd have done the same for me." He smiled, the snow catching in his lashes. Inside, the cabin had held its heat. She set to warming the beans left from the morning's pot, and he peeled off his mittens, flexing his stiff fingers. "Will you teach me to sled the mule next time?" she asked, passing him the bread knife. "If you're willing to risk the trail." "I've risked worse," she said, half laughing. He cut thick slices of bread, glancing over at her. "I know." That night they lay close under the quilt, her back against his chest, his hand resting just above her hip. "I've been thinking," she said after a long stretch of quiet. "In the spring we could build onto the cabin, just a little room off the back. Enough space for a cradle." He shifted, breath still and quiet. "You sure?" he asked. She turned to face him, her eyes steady in the dark. "I've never been so sure of anything." He pulled her closer, pressing his mouth to her hair. "Then we'll start drawing plans tomorrow." Outside, the snow fell again, softer now, blanketing the land they'd come to call home. Inside, their hands found each other in the dark, and the silence wrapped around them, not empty, but full with the weight of all they'd chosen. The first thaw came with a rush of water through the creek beds, tugging at roots and washing last year's leaves from the banks. Mud clung to the wagon wheels, and the chickens scratched restlessly at the thawing ground. Quentin stood on the slope behind the cabin, surveying the stretch of land where they'd marked the new addition. His measuring stake leaned at an angle, half sunk from last night's rain. Selena joined him, her boots caked and her skirts damp at the hem. She carried a folded canvas roll with penciled drawings, corners smudged from handling. "We'll shift the door to face the grove," she said, pointing. "Morning light comes through there clean." He nodded, crouching to check the line of the stakes. "We'll need green cut beams from the north ridge. I can haul them 2 at a time. I'll strip the bark," she offered, "and rework the hearth stones so the warmth reaches through." He looked up at her, rainwater darkening the shoulders of her coat. "You've already thought of everything." "Not everything," she said, "but enough to start." They worked side by side over the next weeks. Quentin hewed the beams by hand, his shirt clinging to his back by noon. Selena dug post holes with the sharpened spade he'd filed down just for her grip, the calluses along her thumbs deepening with each day. They said little while they worked, but their silences grew richer, filled with nods and glances that needed no translation. One morning, while she stood brushing sawdust from her palms, she said, "When I was a girl, I imagined a home with a porch like this. Somewhere I could sit and listen to the rain without shivering." Quentin leaned against the half-framed wall, arms crossed. "I never pictured anything past the ridge, just kept waiting for something to pull me forward. And now, I don't want to go anywhere," he said. "Not as long as your boots are by the door." A robin called low from the cottonwood. She stepped toward him, drawing close enough that their breath mingled. "I was thinking," she said, "we could plant cottonwood saplings on the north slope. So there's shade for when the child's old enough to run." He touched her belly where the curve had just begun to show. "It'll take years before they're tall enough." "I'm not in a hurry," she said. By late spring, the addition stood roofed and sound, with a window that looked out toward the eastern hills. Quentin carved a cradle from aspen, working late into the evenings with a lantern lit on the workbench and the scent of cedar clinging to his shirt. Selena hung sprigs of sweet fern near the sill and folded linen cloths into a tall pine chest she'd scrubbed clean with lye. One afternoon, she rode into town on the mule cart for muslin and thread. Quentin stayed to finish the cradle's final sanding. When she returned, her cheeks were pink with wind, and her eyes shimmered with something more than weather. "They were holding a land meeting at the Grange Hall," she said, stepping down from the cart. "The widow Graham's been offered a parcel east of the river. But she's near blind in one eye and can't farm alone." Quentin looked at her, dusting sawdust from his sleeves. "You want her here. I want her safe. I thought we could build a lean-to near the barn. She'd keep her pride if she had her own roof." He nodded. "We'll get started once the spring calves are branded." She rested her forehead against his for a moment longer than needed. "There's no one else I'd rather build a life with." That summer, the days lengthened until the light stretched past supper. The garden swelled with squash and chard, and the hens laid regular as clockwork. Widow Graham came in early July, bringing a sack of heirloom beans and a battered fiddle. Her lean-to rose in 3 days, and by the 4th, she was tending the hens like she'd been born to it. Selena's belly grew round, and by August, she moved slower but with no less determination. Quentin cut a path to the river where the water pooled deep enough for wading. On the hottest days, she walked there in the late morning, skirt hiked and feet bare, trailing her fingertips through the current. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees and the porch boards warmed beneath their feet, he brought her a bowl of blackberries he'd picked from the far slope. "I've been wondering," he said as she ate them one by one, "if you'd want your name on the land deed." She looked up, surprised. "It's yours. It's ours," he said. "Always was. I just didn't know it back then." "I'd like that," she said, setting the bowl aside. "But more than that, I'd like to name the child after your mother, if it's a girl." He didn't speak, only reached for her hand and pressed it to his chest. The baby came in the first week of September, just after a thunderstorm rolled low over the valley and left the air smelling of wet pine. Selena labored steadily, brow damp, voice low. Quentin never left her side. Widow Graham boiled water and kept the fire fed, her presence like a steady drumbeat through the hours. When the child finally arrived, pink and squalling, Quentin caught her in his hands. He wrapped her in the linen Selena had stitched weeks before and held her close, his eyes bright with awe. "She's perfect," Selena whispered, her voice thick with tears. "She's really ours." He laid the child in her arms. "Welcome home, little Ruth." That night the fire burned low and the cradle creaked softly beside the bed. Quentin lay awake, listening to his wife's breathing, the rhythm of it steady and worn into his bones like the trail that led home. Years passed, quiet and full. The cottonwoods on the hill grew tall enough to cast shade by late morning. Ruth learned to walk chasing chickens, then to read by the window where the sun fell golden on the floorboards. Selena taught her how to braid rosemary into cord, and Quentin built her a stool just high enough to reach the garden beds. The cabin never emptied again. The porch held 3 chairs now, and the lean-to behind the barn became a refuge for passers-by who needed a warm meal or a place to rest. They never spoke of the road that led her there, that cold March evening when she'd arrived half-starved and too tired to run. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the life they'd built from its ending, a life not easy, but true. A life rooted deep in the soil, in the hands that worked it, and in the hearts that chose love not once, but every day since. And so, with the land steady beneath them and the seasons turning slow and sure, they lived together whole, enduring and deeply, quietly happy.